Jury finds Meta and Google negligent in landmark social media addiction trial. And I think it's related to another story that we saw out of the Supreme Court. But we'll start with Meta and Google. And the details here is that there was this young woman who testified that her childhood use of social media created an addiction to the technology, especially YouTube and Facebook, and this aggravated her mental health problems. And I suppose I'd like to start off right away by saying that as much as it would be, I suppose, maybe fashionable to have a hot take of, well, you should be responsible for your own control over such things, over any kind of addiction, over any kind of substance you're abusing or technology you're abusing, any kind of material that you're abusing, you should be responsible. I think everyone does have a level of responsibility for that, but it is difficult to break an addiction once formed, and especially when the addiction is formed at a young age. I think we can all sympathize with someone who is exposed to drugs through the misdeeds of their parents, and then from childhood is addicted to these things, and they struggle deeply with getting out of it. It could be alcohol as well. I think we can all have sympathy with that, and I think it's important.
Those people who were prescribed painkillers and weren't told that they were addicted. This happened for an extended period of time. They were prescribed them for 6 months or longer, and the pharmaceutical companies actually hid the fact that they were addictive.
Yeah.
And then it came out later on. Well, then you've got people who are addicted and we're trying to get them off. Like, that wasn't their fault. There's a similar kind of corollary here, because for many of the people who, started using social media, they didn't think it was addictive, but the social media companies themselves were creating intentionally a system where you get the dopamine hits, where it actually does become something that you can't easily turn away from. Yeah. So I think that, it may sound like an extreme corollary that I'm making, but I don't think it's erroneous. I really don't.
Yeah, people, I think they get hung up on the fact, if it's a physical thing you're addicted to, that has more of an effect. It's something that your body is craving and needs. When it comes to the alcohol, you're having these physical effects. It's almost worse when it's this mental thing, when it's a real sort of psychological bug that gets in your head and gets you hooked. In many ways, that can be even more addictive than a physical thing that you just kind of have to force through the cold turkey symptoms to get out of. These physical things are really, really insidious in the way that they get into you. And so the social media aspect, again, this is they're reporting it as a precedent-setting verdict, a groundbreaking verdict. I think it is, that Google and Meta are being held liable for basically their attempts to make their products as addictive as possible. They want these things to be used, of course. They want you to keep using them. And so they're being held liable for playing a significant role in this poor young lady's social media addiction that she says worsened her mental health conditions. So I think it's a really interesting precedent being set, and my hope is that it does have an effect in terms of the usability of the internet, and maybe, God willing, I think what would be great is if we see sort of a push to make the internet less about these kind of repetitive social media aspects and more about the good uses of the internet for sharing information in a more responsible way.
Yeah, I will say, from the company's perspective, it has to be a kind of blurry line. Like, of course, you want people to be on your site for longer. Even before you had social media companies, you had regular news sites that were funded by advertising, and the advertising required views. And so remember when you had these long articles and you'd have to click, the next page for one after the other. And the whole point was that you stay on the site and also get ad revenue.
Yep.
And so I kind of do understand, like, any website that is created, for the most part, is going to want you to stay there as long as possible. Where does the line exactly occur where you go, okay, but now you're making it intentionally addictive to somebody?
Yeah.
And we do know, though, that these social media companies actually brought in psychologists and actually studied the brain in order to figure out how to get the dopamine hit, which is why they had the little notification thing that lets you know, oh, look, somebody has actually, clicked on your thing. And it gives people a sense of fulfillment, and it keeps them, in a certain sense, trapped there. And so that there really is a lot, but it's kind of a blurry line, and I'm not sure how you legally make that distinction between, yes, I want the person to stay using my product, which is a website, to, oh, I've made my site intentionally addictive so that they use the product. I think that's a very difficult thing. But there are, when it comes to children especially, I think that's one of the key issues, is that we're taking people at young age and basically forming them with this addiction. And yes, there's a role of parents in that. And yes, there's always going to be a role for personal responsibility in pretty much everything that we do.
Of course.
But when you have, a company that's targeting children and then using a method that is known for causing an addiction, there has to be some kind of preventative at that point. We have to be willing to say, okay, this is actually wrong. And I think most people who may roll their eyes at the idea of a social media addiction will also be familiar with the fact that, okay, so if you put your phone like, 3 feet away from you, how often do you just reach for it by impulse when nothing is actually happening? Like that's, a physical result as a result of this sort of psychological addiction. You just do it. You just go and look, well, maybe I have a notification of something.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about. So the person ends up spending hours scrolling when they never even intended to pick up their phone. Like if you imagine that you were going to go to a retreat. Any kid doesn't have to even be religious. You're just there out in the rural area of some place, and you don't have any technology. Do you come out of that in a healthier psychological way or in an unhealthier way? Like, this isn't even a question. Everybody knows that you come out of that and you are happier and healthier and freer.
Absolutely.
It's just very obvious, And so when you think about it, I think it ought to be clear to all of us that this is inherently problematic.
Yeah, for sure. And again, this is something that is natural for any of these providers to do. We here at Rise Right, we want you to click on our show. We want you to watch it. We want you to get something enjoyable visually out of it. That's why we came up with a logo that we think looks nice. That's why we came up with a color combination that we think looks nice. We don't just smack this white title page up with black plain text that says Rise Right. We come up with all these marketing aspects because we want you to enjoy our product. Essentially, there is a marketing angle to that, and we think that it's worth it because we hopefully provide something worthwhile. We provide the saints, we provide the news, we provide these updates, that sort of thing. So there's a again, as you say, this gray area where some of it is you don't want to be sort of deceiving people, right? You don't want to deceive people, but you also don't want to be just completely unlikable and something that people never want to come back and use again. So there's always this sort of crossover area where you need to figure out what's still within good moral ethical guidelines and what's becoming deceptive, manipulative, or downright evil. And I think again, remember, I always like to bring up how Google used to have in their headquarters their big catchphrase on the wall, "Don't be evil." And
used to be on Google.com.
Yeah,
you would go and it was right underneath the logo.
Those days are long, long gone, I think. And it's good that they're being held responsible. But I think there's an aspect, and I think we can get to this after this quick break we'll take, that's related to this Supreme Court ruling that I think is also very significant. And it may get into a debate about what should be publicly controlled, what should be privately held. I think it'll be interesting, but I do think it's an objectively good thing for anyone who's concerned about social media and about the effect of technology, especially on kids, on these kids who are growing up just addicted to TikTok and Snapchat and any of these social media platforms, these kids who are raised essentially on their iPads 24/7 almost. I think this is a good development to see these companies face legal repercussions, but I think it can and should go beyond just saying, oh, don't make your programs so addictive, so to speak.
Absolutely.